done up here. And so Casey, I'm going to share it, but I'm going to go through very, very quickly, and some of it I might omit because you know what? It's not something that's going to be real pertinent to you at this point in time. So, Kate, let me know if you can see the screen.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we are here today to talk a little bit about the math standards, and the standards were rewritten during the school year last year. What had happened was that the state decided that they were going to be redoing our state assessments, and they decided that, you know what, it would be a good idea if we revise the standards since that was going to be done in the future. And that way our new assessment would be based on our new standards, and we wouldn't have to have the assessment start off with an old version of the standards and then convert halfway in between. And so the decision was made to form a committee and to revise the math standards. So a committee of teachers from North Dakota was brought together in the summer of 2022. And they started to work on the revisions to those math standards. They were guided through the process, and the process was facilitated by Dr. Jeff Boyer, who is out of NDSU. And so he was very, very instrumental in helping us as we walk through that process. What you are going to see today is some of the information that we have put together, and we are also going to talk a little bit about how you can use the standards, since that's probably going to be very, very important. The new standards will be assessed in the spring of 2025, which gives us a year to go through and start implementing those standards. And if you have high school friends who are wondering which of the standards are going to be assessed on the high school assessment, it'll be the grades 9 and 10 standards. So today we're going to look at the objectives, which are to talk about the purpose of standards, the design of the standards, and the components. And then we're going to dig into our new standards and show you a little bit more about them. The purpose of standards are to basically assist districts with the development of curriculum. They also set a baseline of knowledge for the students in North Dakota to have achieved by the time they graduate. And they also have some indicators that describe where students should be to demonstrate that they are proficient and that they are on the path toward reaching the level of skill and knowledge that will be expected of them when they do graduate. One way to think about standards and to think about curriculum and instruction and practices and materials and how all of that connects together is to think about a house. The state standards are the foundation of the house. Everything is built upon those standards, so it was very, very important to us that our standards were very, very solid. From there, the districts take those standards and they use those to help develop their curriculum. Once the district has developed their curriculum, they use that curriculum to select any resources that they have, to select practices that will go along with their curriculum, and the teachers then use that curriculum to design their units and their lessons that they are going to be using. When we wrote the standards, we needed to remember that the standards needed to be broad enough to cover the basic skills and knowledge that would be taught, and the specific details would be addressed at the district level. The standards do not identify specific strategies, and the standards do not identify learning tasks. When we look at our new math standards, we will see that it lists the committees, the writing committee members and the review committee members, as well as the NDSU support people that we had that helped us facilitate our standards, and some of the Department of Public Instruction staff that assisted along the journey. It's very, very important that we note that the new standards were written by teachers from across our state who teach a variety of levels. We had some elementary teachers, we had some middle school teachers, and we had high school teachers help us write the standards. In addition, we also had some university teachers to help us make sure that we were going to make sure those students were prepared when they hit the university level. The standards have a superintendent's foreword in which Superintendent Basler outlines some of the challenges and goals for the new standards. The introduction to the standards outlines the vision of the writers and explains some of the reasons they made the decisions that they did. This section also outlines the standards development process. It talks about the input that we received from the public comment, as well as our review committee, and how the writing committee used that to help create our new standards. The introduction also has a page that explains how the standards are to be read. The next section you see is a glossary, which defines some of the terms that are used in the standards. The standards contain a resource section that identify the sources the committee members used to help them as they were writing the standards. The standards themselves, which explain what the students should know and be able to do. And then the math and the ELA standards have a new feature that we didn't have in other standards, a standards progression, which is at the very back of the standards. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. It also contains an appendices, which has some of the key mathematical concepts identified in that, and it's got some good resources to help teachers as they're going through and teaching the standards. The standards components. Our new standards are color-coded. We have 4 color-coded categories, which are organized in the order of development. The first section that you will see is the number and operations area, because it is very, very important that our students have a very solid foundation in their numeracy skills in order for them to have the concepts that they need to perform proficiently within algebra and geometry later on. And so we wanted to make sure that this section was first. After that, you're going to see the algebraic reasoning section, which is where they start to develop the idea of putting those number sentences together and starting to solve those equations. Those equations are also used in geometry. The geometry section starts to build those basic shape concepts and starts to get into the calculation of area and volume and some of those types of things. And then the last section that you're going to see is the data and probability section. And that one is one in which we made some changes and brought that down lower to the lower grades, because we saw that informational literacy in the ELA area started at 2nd grade, but in our previous standards, the data and probability section did not start until 6th grade. And so if they're reading graphs in 2nd grade in reading, they should be able to do it in math as well. The next thing that you're going to see is that we have subcategories. These are the lighter shade of the color. This is where the students identify some of the components that are necessary to help students achieve the goals set within the category. And the subcategories are mainly seen in grades K through 8. The only subcategory that is used at the high school level is the functions category within the algebraic reasoning. The final element of the standards themselves. These standards describe the things the students should be able to know and do, and to show that they are proficient within that category by the end of the grade level or grade span in the high school case. The standards also contain the skills progression, which is at the end of the document. In your introduction, if you look at page 7, it has the definition of the math attributes. The math attributes are a summary of the former math practices and are based upon the learning continuum, which was written in the state several years ago. And so it aligns with the we are linking 2 different documents. We are linking that learning continuum with our math standards to help us develop some of those connections, which help solidify some of the instruction that we're providing in our districts. Page 8 explains how to read the standards. And so it talks about what the coding means within the different standards. And if we go back to the previous slide, you will see that there is a code at the beginning of the standards. The 6 refers to the grade level. The NO refers to the category. The NS refers to the subcategory, and the 1 would be the number of that particular standard. And so the coding system is consistent all the way through the grade levels. Going on. we talk about some of the changes. One of the changes that we made was within the order of the categories that were used for our math standards. We started with number and operations because that is the basis, and we want to make sure our foundation is very, very solid and firm. The math attributes were placed at the beginning of each level or span to highlight the problem solving and critical thinking skills in the previous standards. The math practices were found at the very beginning in the introduction, and you didn't see them again. And so we found that many people weren't looking at them at all. We added standards for patterns in the elementary to better prepare for function work in the middle and high school. And we started that work at kindergarten because we found that, you know what? Students were working on patterns in kindergarten anyway. We moved work with data earlier in the grade levels to align with the informational literacy skills and to provide time to develop those skills before middle and high school. As we looked at data, we found that our students were weaker in the areas of geometry and in data. And so we wanted to make sure that they were exposed to the data a little bit earlier. When we talked about basic facts, one of the things that the middle and high school representatives on the committee stated was that, you know, our students did not have those basic facts down pat. And so we expect automaticity within the basic facts so that they are better able to focus on solving equations and expressions once they get to the middle and high school level. Those teachers said, you know, they're spending so much time trying to figure out what those basic facts are and how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide that they can't focus on the equations and expressions. And they felt that that was bringing the students down. So we want them to know them automatically, like really, really fast. We reworded the standards so we could clarify our expectations, and we took out some of the excess language and verbiage so that they were easier to understand. As we were writing the standards, one of our themes was that we wanted to make sure that our standards were written clearly enough that our next door neighbor could understand them, and that next door neighbor is somebody who is not in education. We also reduced the overall number of standards. Most of the reductions took place at the elementary and middle school. There were some reductions at the high school level. They didn't reduce quite as much. The high school level was broken into grade spans for grades 9, 10, and 11, 12. In the previous standards, grades 9 through 12 were all together. And at one point, they had thought about dividing the standards into Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, and then a Course 4, which would allow for the advanced concepts. But as we took a look at the course codes that we had, we found that there are some differences in course configurations throughout the state. And so putting the standards in the grade spans allowed us to make allowance for those differences. And it also allows the schools to determine how they're going to set up their math courses. The other aspect that we looked at was that by having the 9-10, we can clearly identify which of those standards are going to be covered on the state assessment, which was not always the case when it was a 9 through 12. The other changes that we made, we included the standards progressions. This is found at the end of the standard document. It's organized by standard with skill area headings so that the progression of the skills may be seen K through 12. Now you may see that some of the standards are represented in more than one skill area. Math was a little bit different than ELA because in math you have some of the standards that are address more than one skill or that may be a prerequisite for more than one skill. When you're looking at that skill progression, you're going to see that the new skills are printed in blue type so that you may begin to see the increase in rigor and you can see what was new at each individual level. When you go on to the standards page, and I'll take you there in a bit, you're going to see that we have some accompanying documents to help make that conversion from the 2017 standards to the 2023 standards easier. One of them is a crosswalk document that outlines the differences between the 2017 and the 2023 standards. not only does it outline differences, but it also tells you which standards are similar to the standards from 2017. In the 2017 standards, the disciplinary literacy was not included in these, and it was in the ELA, but we wanted to make it so that it would be easier for people to understand what could be done to help meet that goal of implementing disciplinary literacy within math. And so a separate document was created that highlights the math attribute standards that align with disciplinary literacy. And it also outlines some of the things that could be done that would help lead to that disciplinary literacy. There is a crosswalk between the math attributes and the 2017 math practices and it shows how those attributes and practices fit together and gives some ideas of some of the things that may be done to help implement the math attributes as you're going through and teaching your math. One of the things that the committee did was looked at several resources to help us with the progression of skills, and there are some books out there that are some good resources to help with teaching the math. One of them is a series called Making Sense of Mathematics for Teachers for teaching that is published by Solution Tree. And this one gives a list of some of the progressions of skills within those grade spans, but it also has some activities and things in there to help you with instruction in math. And then the other resources on here, Writing in Math Class and Math Talk, help to implement those math attributes into the disciplinary literacy. Writing in Math helps talk a little bit about math journaling, and it helps with it helps give you a window into what those students are thinking as they're going through and writing about how they have solved problems. Math Talk, there are two different books on Math Talk. One of them is a book called Show and Tell, which is basically a K-2 book. And then Making Number Talks Matter extends those math talks up into the intermediate and middle and high school levels, because when they first started Math Talks, they didn't think that they would pertain to the older students, and they found that, you know what, when the students talk about how they're solving the problems, it helps us better understand their thought processes and misconceptions, and it also helps them explain the strategies that they use to solve their problems. Now, there are some websites, and I'm going to quit with the PowerPoint because I'm going to move into that. So let's see here. Got to stop sharing. Okay, and I'm going to move to something else because I have to move to the web page right now, because I have some web pages queued up. Okay, the first web page that I want to take you to is the North Dakota standards-based learning page. This is a page that is sponsored by our REAs. One of the things the REAs did this summer was met to go through the new math standards, the new ELA standards, and develop priority standards and proficiency scales. And so that work is in process, and when it is available, it will be located in the resource area on this particular page. So keep that one handy. They expect that will be out in November. The next page that I would like to show you is the content standards page. And if you go down here and you click into the math standards, that is where you will find our standards. You will find the crosswalk document, which helps you. You said you're a 5th grade teacher, right, Casey?
Yeah, 5th grade.
Okay. It tells you what the what the new standard is, what the old standard was, and what the difference is. So if you have some favorite lessons that you did that were aligned to the old standards, it tells you how they fit within the new standards. So that one might be valuable for you. The other thing we have are that math attributes one, where it talks about what the practices were and what the current attribute is, and then it tells about some of the concepts that might be included within that area to show that you're meeting those attributes. And then there is the disciplinary literacy in math, and this is a one-pager, and it shows how you can implement the math in reading, writing, and thinking, and how it all fits together. And then there's another thing that I want to show you. On this page, if you go to where it says in blue here, the North Dakota case server, and click on that, it will take you to this. And if you go here and go to the Department of Public Instruction and hit the math content standards, and your 5th grade teacher, you will find the attributes here, and you will also find that within these concepts, and I'm going to pick base 10, and we'll go here. It will show you what standards are related to the standard that you have highlighted. It will show you related to and from. From means that it was in there before this one came up. And we'll also show you what some of the predecessors were for that particular standard. The other thing that it will show you is if it is a standard that precedes another standard that is coming up later on. And I know there's one of those in here because I was working in here today. For example, if you're looking at the patterning in 5th grade, you're going to see that there are some areas within 6th and 7th and 11th grade where the patterning would be, where the skills that you're teaching are going to develop some of that baseline that they need to get into those particular areas. And from there, we're going to go into some of the changes that happened within the standards. And so I'm going to go back to the standards document and try to get into that to try to help identify those. Oops, that's not what I want. Here we go. One of the things that you're going to see is that we added some counting and cardinality at the in the intermediate grades, because when we did our research and we looked at some of the reports that were out there, they said that this was very, very important, that they understand their number sense very, very thoroughly so that they have those concepts down by the time that they get to the high school level. We expanded number identification and writing through 5th grade for whole numbers and decimals to provide that firm foundation. We moved skip counting in 1st grade in fractions. If you look at some of the earlier grades, like 1st grade, you would have seen that where they divide a shape into fractional parts, they had that in the geometry area. We moved it back into fractions because it's the beginning of fractions. We also added some standards when it comes to the area of money, because we found that students are not able to count change and that their money skills were lacking a little bit. One of the things that we did do within the fraction, you will see that there are some areas where they have where they're supposed to identify up to like 1/8 of an inch, but they didn't go 1/16. So districts may want to make sure they add those 1/16 of an inch in there when you get to the measurement area, because that's something that's important for the career and technical education, and we kind of messed up there a little bit. So we're open. We admit we messed up a little bit. We forgot that part. We kept the number and operational values consistent. Grade 2 goes to 100. They go to 1,000 in 3rd grade. And so previously they'd have some place value addition to 1,000 in 2nd, but all the other work was to 100. So we develop some consistency there. We separated concepts into separate standards to better assess student skills and identify where they may have broken down. For example, addition and subtraction. When we look at the division in the 5th grade level, we're working on whole number quotients and the longer division, but in the old standards, they added in division of fractions when the kids didn't have the division down pat yet. And so we moved that division of fractions up to the middle school because they need to develop the concept of division before they're ready to move up to the other part. They also are working on learning how to identify, learning how to multiply fractions. They don't have that down yet in 5th grade. And so that was one of the other reasons that that division of fractions moved up to the middle school level. It allows more time to become proficient with the prerequisites before we add the new skills. And we added work with equivalent fractions and decimals in grade 5 to develop the relationship between those two. We extended the patterning, as we had said before, and we did reduce standards in the elementary grades, and we also got rid of redundancy within the standards. When we look at the work that was done within the geometry area, one of the things that you're going to see is that they focus in on area and perimeter, and they don't get into using the formulas to calculate out volume until they get to middle school. They're working with developing that concept first and recognizing volume as an attribute of the prisms and working with those unit cubes before they start moving into the formula because they weren't ready, because they didn't have the concepts down well enough to move into using that formula at the 5th grade level. So that was removed and that was added up to the 6th grade level. They did, let's see, they did talk about finding the area and the perimeter of a rectangle, and they do get into the formula somewhat within that, within the 5th grade level, because they moved that all down. We had to balance between the two when we were playing the game of who gets what. We started, we worked with some of the data, and it's basically working with the line plots in the 5th grade level and then using the graphs and diagrams to represent, analyze, and solve problems. They're already doing that in science, and they're already using those skills when they're in reading. And so it just made sense to bring it down to the 5th grade level as well. Going on to middle school. Kate, are you going to handle this part?
Sure, I can. So I taught middle school math for the last 5 years prior to this position. So students in middle school are taking those arithmetic skills that they learned in elementary school, and they really start to apply them in the middle school, especially those algebraic concepts. So a lot of the changes that were made in the middle school, a lot of standards were combined that were redundant, or any standard that talked about a specific strategy. Um, some standards, they were moved to areas in which the skills applied, just to make the placement more consistent, like all the ratio and proportional relationship standards are now in algebraic reasoning. Prior, they were both in algebraic reasoning and number and operations, so now they're all in one spot. Some of the standards were moved to different grade levels to allow skills to build. So in number and operations, the focus was placed on number systems and expanding the knowledge of whole numbers learned in elementary school to real numbers. So they focused on working with rational numbers at this level, and then irrational numbers starts in 8th grade now. They are continuing to develop proficiency with multiplication and division of larger numbers, multiplying and dividing fractions and decimals. They are just beginning to work with exponents and integers and using them in expressions, and then expand those applications of basic operations to rational numbers. Moving along to the algebraic reasoning. So now I already said this, but all the ratio and proportion standards were moved to this area. The middle school is focusing on linear relationships, and then they expand those when they move up to the high school. This just helps develop a better foundation. Um, we moved pairs of linear relationships standards to grades 9 and 10, and then expanding the use of the coordinate plane in the middle school. And then functions start in 8th grade. For geometry, Davonne already mentioned this, but area was moved to elementary, and middle school is now focused more on volume. We found that like the operational skills needed to do volume weren't proficient at elementary school, so it didn't really make sense to assess that standard in middle school. Volume is a lot more complex. Cross sections of figures was deleted. That first concept is used in advanced high school courses, so it's going to stay there. Standards reference any standard that reference like given formulas. And so instead of having students like memorize the formulas, they are given them, and we want to know, are they able to apply that formula rather than just memorize it. Any standard regarding the same skill was combined, and strategies were omitted. And then just overall, they really worked to decrease like the whole wordiness of the 2017 standards. And then the last category, data, probability, and statistics. A lot of these standards were combined because a lot of them focused on the same concept or skill. And then standards, again, any standard identifying a strategy was omitted. And then probability starts in 7th grade now. And extended skills interpreting data in different formats beyond the formats used in elementary school. So some pretty big changes in the middle school, but a lot of them, as a former middle school teacher, I can definitely appreciate. So Davonne, I'll let you move on to high school.
Alrighty, the high school standards, as I said earlier, were broken down into 2 grade spans, 9, 10, and 11, 12. The concepts on the state assessment will be the 9, 10 standards. Since the state exam occurs in 10th grade, it made sense that those would be the concepts that would be assessed. There was a lot of communication between the middle school and the high school regarding how far learners would go in middle school and where high school would start developing concepts. What they found was that there was some overlap, and so they wanted to try to prevent that. There was also a lot of communication with the university team members to identify what was needed before the students got to the post-secondary level. And again, what is covered in the university level versus what's covered in the high school level? Is it really necessary that they go into some of the topics that are going to be covered at university? And what are the things the universities would like to see them having at the high school level? They found some skills that were included in standards that would preferably be taught post-secondary, and they also found some repetition of skills at the middle school and at the high school level. They broke down into grades 9, 10, and 11, 12, which allowed standards to be extended for the upper levels. You're going to see within the standards document, there are some places where they'll say that the standard is an extension of a standard from 9, 10. That allowed existing standards to be divided into skills that build upon each other, so that we made sure that they had those prerequisites solid before it moved into the next particular level. Much of the high school work was trying to figure out which standards belonged at which level and to examine the development of the skills and the concepts to make sure that they are building upon each other. And that would constitute the largest change at the high school level. Our standards were organized at the high school to allow for like concepts to be placed in like areas, as well as to allow for skills to build as the standards progressed. At the high school level, the categories were used, whereas the subcategories are used in the elementary and middle school. Those were not used at the high school because they didn't feel like they needed to break theirs up quite so much. The only subcategory, as I said earlier, is that functions subcategory in the algebraic reasoning. The high school level focused on rewording their standards to make them easier to understand and interpret. Although I have to say, as a non-high school person who does not speak high school math language, it's still a little confusing. Grades 9 and 10 focus on rational numbers and basic radical expressions. Grades 11 and 12 expand that concepts in the number and operations area to more complex radical expressions, irrational numbers, and complex numbers. They work with polynomials, vectors, and matrices at the grades 11 and 12. Algebraic reasoning, they work with quadratic and exponential equations in 9-10 and build upon the work in linear equations that was done in grade 8. The systems of equations move from grade 8 to grades 9-10 since it is more advanced, and the move allowed students to become more proficient working with basic linear equations before expanding that concept. Grade 8 focused on identifying functions, and the previous standards focused on writing the functions moved to grades 9 and 10, so that students would be able to identify and interpret the functions before they're asked to write them. And the work on functions expands into grades 11 and 12 to include trigonomic functions and logarithmic functions. In geometry, most of the geometry standards fall into grades 9 and 10. The conic section standards were moved to grades 11, 12, which expand upon concepts that are learned in grades 9 and 10. Data probability and statistics, most of the standards for that area are found in the grades 11, 12 area because they would be taught within a statistics course. If you had a statistics course in your school, standards in grades 9 and 10 build upon those middle school standards regarding representing, interpreting, and analyzing data. And the standards also further develop finding probability of events using formulas. In grades 11 and 12, the data probability and statistics standards apply algebraic concepts and skills that are learned previously to expand the ability to interpret the data and assess interpretation of that data. And the learners expand their computations of probability at the grades 11 and 12 to eventually find probability distributions. There were some probability standards that the college people recommended taking out because they were things that were done at the college level. And so that is one of the areas that we had some deletions at the high school level. Okay, questions?
All of those documents that you referenced, Devon, today, so the content standards, the crosswalk, the disciplinary literacy, the attributes, I posted everything on this week in the Math Chats course. So if you haven't had time to look through that course, those are there. This recording, I'm also going to post that. So if you want to share with anybody that you think would find this relevant. All the information will be on that Math Chats class. So I just wanted to put that out there.
One of the other things that they are doing is going through the course codes that we have here in the state. And they are in the process of taking those course codes and aligning them to the standards. And so some of the writing committees for the different subject areas are going through those and identifying the standards that should be taught, not have to be, but should or would most likely be taught within those particular courses. And so that's giving them an opportunity to go through and like in ELA, they went through and rewrote some of their descriptions to update them to meet our world rather than when the course codes were written, and some of these were written a very, 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 very long time ago. So they're going through and doing some updating on that as well. That project is in process. Math has not started their work yet, but that will be coming. They're starting with all the high school work, all the high school codes first, and then they'll move down to the other levels. Because in most cases, like in grade 5, yeah, what the standards are is what you're going to teach. um, uh, so anything else? Ryan, Kay, Casey, any questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I've been opening up documents and looking along as you go. So there's a few things I wanted.
You broke up, Kay. Can you try again?
Did you not hear me?
You kind of broke up, so we couldn't understand what you were saying.
Oh, sorry. I heard everything, so I didn't know. We're traveling. Looking at everything too as you've gone along. So there's things I want to dig into further, but not necessarily any questions.
Okay. If you have questions, don't be afraid to ask. Kate and I are happy to answer them. And
Yes, we
Erin
are.
can answer all of your questions regarding those priority standards and proficiency scales. She loves it when I throw things at her.
Always happy to talk about that.
That is the topic of our next math chat. So stay tuned, Davonne.
Hey, they look great. I've looked through them already.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Davonne or I. Feel free to share any of the documents posted. You can share this recording. You can share the link to the Math Chats course. The next one will be in November with Erin leading that one. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.